This is my goals. This is what I'm trying to do. My father died of a heart attack. All right. I am not better than I am my father from a health standpoint, which means if I don't do the right things, I will die of a heart attack. That is the reality of things. And I remember one time I was helping my parents move out of this house they were in while they were building another house. And I fell through the front lawn. There was an abandoned well. It's like a septic tank or a well in the front lawn. And I was carrying a piece of furniture because that's what I did back then. And I started sinking into the floor. And half my body wound up in this putrid abandoned well. And the only thing that kept me from falling into the well was I had these humongous coffee table like lats and traps. So they literally hovered me above the hole. I was too thick to fall in the hole. So not knocking everything about heavy weightlifting. I had no change of clothes. So I had to wear my dad's clothes, which was a pair of jean shorts, white socks up to my calves, blue loafers, and a white t-shirt. All right. There was a mirror on the floor because they were moving out of the house. After I put this get up on, I looked in the mirror and I thought I was looking at my dad. And at that point, I realized I am my father. I realized whatever got him, whether it's kidney stones, whether it was kidney disease, whether it was a heart attack, that was waiting for me if I didn't do certain things correctly. There's a very sobering moment for me, right? So I realized that things could not continue the way they were because that would be what's waiting for me. That was the powerlessness of my life. And I think people don't get that term, is that something has got to give, that you cannot live life the way you used to live it if this is your goal, right? Mm-hmm. If your goal is to be a world-class athlete, then guess what? It's what you don't do outside the gym that factors as much in your success as what you do inside the gym, right? Unless you're some genetic freak who can get away with anything. And even then, that eventually catches up with those people. So yeah, that's the world we live in right now. The America where, the Food Network does its whole porn, disguised as food, which is exactly what it is, by the way. If you ever watch those food shows, I mean, it's like, there's some fetish stuff going on in those things. I'm sorry. But if you think you're going to live in that world and still lose weight, that ain't happening. I remember after that moment, I had DVR'd a bunch of cooking shows. I used to love watching them while eating biscuits. And I literally looked at them and I was revulsed by them. I deleted them all out of the DVR because I knew the drive-ins, dive-ins, and dives, whatever, the guy with the spiky hair. Yeah, that show. I knew that couldn't be part of my life anymore for me because it's putting me into a subculture, which is like, this is the best bolognese I ever had. Like, I couldn't be watching the Food Network because all it's doing was make me hungry and go want to eat.
Yeah.
And that's the world we live in. So I almost tell people, if you want to lose weight in modern America, you got to kind of form your own little Vatican. Now, that may be offending some people, but Vatican's like a little country inside a country. You got to kind of form your own little world and hang out with your own kind of people, right? And not allow that stuff in. And if you have a spouse that doesn't want to do that, then guess what? That's your weight challenge, not low carb versus high carb versus machines versus free weights versus low bar versus high bar squat. That's your problem, right? Because if your spouse is constantly eating crap, how are you going to keep that out of your world? You're not going to, right? If your spouse isn't on the same page as you, then that's your issue. And I can't fix that. You've got to fix that. There's no book. I'm not a psych. I can't write a book about that. So that's what I think people really have to do. They have to have kind of a different world than the one we live in, because the one we live in is just economically and socially not conducive to people losing weight, right? The CEO of, I think it was Pepsi, once tried to do something about healthy snacks and the stock went down. She almost lost her job, right? Oh, wow. Yeah. So, I mean, that's how tied in this is. And I'll give another story. So I had a guy once I trained who manufactured a protein bar in Japan, and people wouldn't eat the protein bar. I couldn't put this in the book because it was impossible for me to kind of tell the whole story without giving away too much of the person's identity. But basically, they manufactured a protein bar in Japan that was 120 calories, and no one would buy it because it was too big. They manufactured the same protein bar in the United States, and it was 180 calories, and no one would eat it because it was too small, right? So I don't tell you everything about the MSNBC culture half of the we're all victims kind of thing, is that's real and that's there. Yeah, I mean, that's just that then what you have to do is create your own existence in that way. and lose weight like that. And yeah, does it suck? Yeah, but so does all the other consequences if you don't make that decision. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, your environment is going to dictate a huge part of your success if you're constantly surrounding yourself with just watching all this food that tastes really good. And it's like hyper palatable food on steroids, like the diners, drive-ins. So it's like French fries with some sort of like high fat sauce with bacon bits with,
yeah, why do they
so
always put butter and olive oil in the same dish? You could put me in a pot and put butter and olive oil, I'd probably taste good. I'm just thinking about this. This is a guy who I quote in the book, and he was very nice. He did a review of the book for me. His name's Jason Leinartz. You can look him up online. I can't pronounce. I think it's Leenaarts. I'll put it in the show notes when I post this on YouTube. But he is very open to fact about the fact he used to be a drug addict, and he talks about how he literally had to like abandon entire groups of people that he associated with in order to stay sober. And I'm not trying to compare drug addiction to brownies. I mean, in some ways, there are some consequences people experience that are deadly from certain foods. But his point being is he had to literally change his entire social circle in order to be able to stay sober and live the life. And he has a beautiful wife and a beautiful child now. So obviously the benefits of staying sober paid off for him. He has a successful business. He owns his own gym, has a lot of great stuff going on in his life. Because at one point he made the decision to get sober. And that decision to be sober, and again, I'm not leaking, the guy talks about this all the time. He had to make that decision to have all the wonderful things he has in his life now, and part and parcel, whatever the hell that means, of that decision. I always say these things, and I always wonder what the hell they even mean. But part and parcel of that was he had to say goodbye to a lot of people. He had to say goodbye to a lot of environments. I know people who had to leave the town and the states that they live in because of addiction issues. They just couldn't be in the same city. I had a client once who was an alcoholic who lived in Boston and didn't go back to Boston for 30 years until he had a business thing there. And he said it was the worst. He literally landed in Boston, thought, oh, this isn't bad. I'm in whatever that McCarran Airport, whatever it is. He got to his hotel room. He said he started to shake because just being in the city of Boston, whether it was the smell of Boston or maybe it had something to do with just psychologically, he literally started to shake. And the first thing he did was he went and found a meeting, an AA meeting that he could go to, because that's how powerful just the environment was. Now, I'm not saying you never go in your living room ever again or you blow up your kitchen. I'm not saying something extreme like that. But understand that these are the decisions that people have to make if they've got that serious of a problem. And on some level, you've got to address your problem as seriously as they did. Because again, there's just some games, there's some battles you can't win, right? And you got to be adult enough and you have to be able to admit that and understand that on the other side of that sacrifice is something else that actually is much better. But I think a lot of people can't see that. All they can see is what the pizza and the wings every night, the McDonald's every night, the chocolate chip muffins every night. They can see what that brings them, but they don't see what's on the other side of it. And that in its own way can be just that. Look, I'm never going to say that broccoli tastes as good as a donut, but I can tell you that being leaner and healthier and being able to look in that mirror and realize, no, I'm not going to die of a heart attack, at least not by my own making. There's a lot of great things that go along with that. If you don't believe me, go look that guy's name up and look at the smile on his face when he's with his wife and his kids. And you understand that there's a lot of wonderful things on the other side of sobriety. Right. And sometimes people can't get that in the moment. And whether it's drugs or food or whatever, it's really a substitute for something else. And it's usually a substitute for something else that's much, much, much more meaningful and has a lot more purpose behind it. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, those were really good stories. I think like to give like a less serious, but also practical examples, like with environment, like maybe when someone's dieting, losing their 10%, they hang out with certain people less, like the people that they know, like their foodie friends that like to cook a lot and eat and drink a lot. And maybe during their 10%, losing their 10%, they don't keep certain food, like we talked about, like the eliminating certain food. They don't keep certain foods in the house. They don't go to Popeyes. Like, so I think like your stories were good, but then like bringing it back to
They're a little
little-
intense. Yeah.
like the day-to-day stuff that someone losing the 10% is going to face. It's like the food they bring into their house and the people they're spending the most time around. Those are the two things that they need to be focusing on controlling the most, in terms of making it easier for them to lose that
I
first 10.
actually use in the book, I believe I talk about trash cans.